Have you ever noticed that the harder you chase money, the faster it seems to run away from you? Think about how most of us spend our lives. We wake up early, sit in traffic, trade our time for a paycheck, and stress over bills that seem to grow faster than our bank accounts. From the time we are children, we are told a simple rule. If you work harder, get a better degree, or get a promotion, you will finally become rich. But for most people, that promise does not come true. You end up on a financial treadmill, constantly running, constantly tired, and always wondering why true financial freedom feels like a secret you cannot figure out. We look at rich people and assume they must be geniuses. We think that making money requires a brilliant, complicated mind. But what if everything you have been taught about wealth is completely wrong? What if the secret to freedom is not about working yourself to death, chasing stock trends, or being amazing at math? What if the real secret is simply changing how you act so that you stop chasing money and instead build the habits that make money naturally follow you? To understand how this works, let's look at how other jobs work in the real world. If you want to be a great heart surgeon, you need years of medical school, thousands of hours of practice, and a special skill that most people do not have. If you want to design a massive skyscraper or build a nuclear rocket, you have to be a master of difficult physics and math. In those technical jobs, you cannot skip education. You will never hear a story about a local janitor who performed a successful heart surgery better than a doctor trained at Harvard. It just does not happen because the training is too hard to skip. But the world of money is completely different. Money is the only industry on earth where someone with no college degree, no training, and no connections can totally beat a high-level expert who has the best education and the best network. Why? Because doing well with money is not a science like physics or engineering. Financial success is a soft skill. It is all about behavior. How you act is much more important than what you know. This is the psychology of money. And it is the exact reason why some of the smartest people in the world are often the biggest disasters with their own bank accounts, while ordinary people can become very rich. To see this truth clearly, let me share two extreme stories. They show exactly how high intelligence can fail and how simple good habits can win. Our first story happens at a luxury hotel in Los Angeles, and it is about a man who was a certified genius. In his early 20s, this brilliant tech executive designed and patented a key piece of Wi-Fi technology. He started several companies, sold them for huge amounts of money, and became a multimillionaire. He had all the brainpower a person could ever want. But even though he was incredibly smart, his relationship with money was a bad mix of insecurity and childish stupidity. This executive used to carry around a thick stack of $100 bills that was several inches thick just to show it off. He would wave this brick of cash at anyone who would look, bragging loudly about how much money he had, usually while he was drunk. One afternoon, his behavior became completely crazy. He handed a hotel valet several $1,000s in cash and ordered him to go to a nearby jewelry store to buy a few gold coins that cost $1,000 each. When the valet brought the coins back, the executive and his friends walked out to a dock overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Instead of saving these expensive coins or investing them for the future, they started skipping the gold coins across the water like they were flat rocks. They stood on the dock, laughing as they watched their wealth sink into the ocean just for a quick laugh. A few days later, this same man accidentally broke a $500 lamp in the hotel restaurant. When the manager nicely asked him to pay for it, the executive felt insulted. He pulled out his massive brick of cash, shoved $5,000 into the manager's hands, and told him to get out of his face. You might wonder how long someone can act like that before they run out of money. The answer is not very long. Within a few years, this tech genius went completely broke and lost everything. He was smart enough to make money, but he did not have the behavioral skills to keep it. Now compare that story with our second example, a man named Ronald James Reed. Ronald was the exact opposite of a tech genius. He was born in rural Vermont, raised poor, and was the first person in his family to finish high school. To get to school every day, he had to hitchhike because he could not afford a car. For most of his life, Ronald lived a very quiet, simple, and unnoticed life. He spent 25 years fixing cars at a local gas station, and another 17 years sweeping floors as a janitor at J.C. Penney. He bought a small house for $12,000 when he was 38 years old, and his main hobby was just cutting his own firewood to keep his house warm. By all normal standards, Ronald Reed was just an ordinary worker. But when he died in 2014 at 92 years old, he suddenly became a major story in the international news. People all over the world were shocked to find out that this humble janitor had a secret net worth of over $8 million. In his will, he left $2 million to his stepchildren and more than $6 million to his local hospital and town library. The people who knew him were completely confused. How could a man who swept floors make $8 million? There was no secret fortune, no lottery win, and no inheritance. The explanation is beautiful and simple. Ronald took what little money he could spare from his small wages, invested it steadily into basic, high-quality stocks, and then did the hardest thing in finance. He waited patiently for decades. He let the power of time and compound interest do the heavy lifting. He went from being a simple janitor to a multimillionaire who gave away millions, simply because he was patient. He was rich because he had good habits that had nothing to do with school intelligence. When you look at these two men side by side, you realize something big. The fact that a humble janitor can build an $8 million fortune while a brilliant tech genius loses everything is a situation that only happens with money. In what other job could an amateur totally beat an elite professional? We see the exact same lesson when we look at Wall Street executives. Take a man named Richard Fusco. He was a Harvard-educated businessman with an elite MBA degree who became a top executive at a major investment firm. He was so successful in his career that he won business awards and was praised for his good judgment. He retired in his 40s as a very wealthy man. But just like the tech executive throwing coins into the ocean, Fusco let greed and ego take over. He borrowed massive amounts of money to live a luxury lifestyle. He took out huge loans to build an enormous mansion that had 11 bedrooms, 21 bathrooms, and a see-through glass floor directly over an indoor swimming pool. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, his world collapsed. Because he owed so much money and his wealth was locked up in real estate, he was completely wiped out. He went bankrupt with zero income. In 2014, the exact same year the world learned about the humble janitor's $8 million fortune, this Harvard executive's luxury mansion was sold at a foreclosure auction for a fraction of what it was worth. Think about that contrast for a moment. Ronald Reed, the janitor, was patient. Richard Fusco, the Harvard executive, was greedy. That single difference in behavior was powerful enough to completely wipe out the massive gap in their education and experience. These stories happen every single day because financial success is not about your IQ or where you went to school. It is a soft skill based entirely on your habits, your discipline, and how you handle risk. If you can learn to control your behavior, manage your ego, and stay patient, you can unlock a level of financial freedom that even the smartest people fail to achieve. Throughout this audiobook, we are going to look at the simple rules behind how people behave with money. The goal is to help you stop stressing over every dollar and instead build a life where wealth just follows you automatically. To start, we are going to look at 5 major lessons from Morgan Housel's great book, The Psychology of Money. These 5 rules are going to completely flip how you think about wealth. Let's begin with the first one. Lesson 1. The invisible power of compounding. Think about Ronald Reed, the gas station janitor who managed to save $8 million. When people hear that story, they assume it's a miracle. They figure he must have gotten a lucky tip on a hot stock or won the lottery. But the truth is actually pretty boring. And that's why people miss it. To understand how a regular guy sweeping floors beat the smartest professionals on Wall Street, You have to look at the most powerful force in finance: compound interest. Most people nod along when they hear that phrase, but very few actually get how it works in real life. The reality is our brains just aren't wired to understand compounding. We live in a world where things change in straight lines. If you walk 2 miles today and 2 miles tomorrow, you've walked 4 miles. That makes sense to us, but wealth doesn't grow that way. Wealth grows in a curve. It starts out so slow you barely even notice it, and then it suddenly shoots up like a rocket. To see what I mean, let's look at something that has nothing to do with money: the Earth's ice ages. For a long time, scientists couldn't explain why giant sheets of ice would occasionally cover the planet. They figured it had to be something huge and violent, like massive volcanoes blocking out the sun. But in the early 1900s, a scientist named Milutin Milankovic realized everyone was looking in the wrong place. It wasn't freezing cold winters that caused the ice ages. It was actually slightly cool summers. Think about it this way. Imagine a summer that stays just cool enough that the winter snow doesn't fully melt. A tiny bit of ice is left over. When the next winter comes, it's easier for more snow to pile up on top of that leftover ice. And because there's more snow, the next summer is even less likely to melt it. This loop just keeps repeating. The bright white snow reflects the sun's heat away from the earth, making the weather even colder, which brings even more snow. Within a few hundred years, a tiny layer of leftover snow that nobody cared about turns into a massive sheet of ice covering the whole world. The big takeaway here is that you don't need a massive force to get massive results. You just need a little bit of growth that acts as the fuel for more growth. When that happens, small beginnings turn into mind-blowing results. Money works the exact same way. But because it's hard to see this happening day to day, we always look for the secret to success in the wrong places. Take Warren Buffett. People have written over 2,000 books trying to explain his wealth. They talk about his investment style, his rules, and how he picks companies. But almost all of them leave out the most important detail. Buffett isn't just a great investor. He's been a great investor for his entire life. At his peak, Buffett was worth over $84 billion. But if you look at the actual math, over $81 billion of that wealth came after he turned 65. Our minds have a really hard time processing that. We want to believe he's just a genius at picking stocks, but his real secret weapon is that he's been investing for 75 years. To see how much time matters compared to raw skill, let's play a game of what if. Buffett started investing seriously when he was 10. By 30, he had about $1 million. But what if he had lived a normal life instead? What if he spent his 20s traveling around and didn't start investing until he was 30, with a normal savings of $25,000? Even if he still got his amazing 22% annual returns, but decided to retire at 60 to play golf and hang out with his grandkids, he wouldn't be worth $84 billion today. He would be worth about $11.9 million. That is 99.9% less than his real wealth. His skill was investing, but his real superpower was time. This is the hidden trick of compounding. We waste all our energy trying to find the highest possible returns right now, and we completely ignore the thing that matters most: how long we can stay invested. We want an overnight win, but real wealth is almost always just decades of slow, quiet growth that finally hits a turning point. Compare Buffett to Jim Simons, the head of a famous hedge fund. If you look at pure skill, Simons is the greatest investor to ever live. He has grown his money at 66% a year for decades. That is 3 times better than Buffett's returns. Nobody else even comes close. Yet Jim Simons is worth around $21 billion, which means he's 75% less rich than Buffett. Why? Because Simons didn't find his investing groove until he was 50 years old. He has had less than half as many years to let his money grow. If Simons had grown his money at 66% for the same 70 years Buffett did, his net worth would be a number so big it wouldn't even make sense to us. This proves that building wealth isn't about how fast you grow. It's about how long you keep going. The issue is that our brains prefer addition over multiplication. If I ask you to add 8 plus 8 plus 8 9 times in a row, you can do it easily. It's 72. But if I ask you to multiply 8 times 8 times 8 9 times in a row, your brain will freeze up because the answer is over 134 million. Because we can't visualize that kind of growth, we ignore it, and we try to solve our money problems the hard way. Look at computer hard drives as an example. In the 1950s, a hard drive held about 3.5 megabytes. By the 1970s, it held 70 megabytes. For decades, the growth was steady, but it didn't feel like anything special. And then suddenly it exploded. Between 1950 and 1990, the world gained 300 megabytes of storage. But from 1990 to today, we gained 100 million megabytes. Even Bill Gates missed this. In 2004, he openly wondered why anyone would ever need a gigabyte of storage because his brain was thinking in a straight line. He didn't realize that when things compound, they don't just grow, they speed up. Honestly, the most important book on investing shouldn't be about stock strategies or the economy. It should be a one-page book called Shut Up and Wait. It would just have a single chart showing that if you can stay in the game long enough, growth is bound to happen. Most people who lose money in the stock market don't lose because they bought the wrong stock. They lose because they got impatient and didn't let compounding do its job. In the real world, this leads to a massive mistake. People think good investing means getting the absolute highest returns. But those high returns are usually just one-time lucky streaks that come with massive risks. Good investing is actually just about getting pretty good returns that you can stick with for a really long time. That's when the magic happens. This is why staying rich requires a totally different skill than getting rich. Getting rich takes risk, hustle, and optimism. But staying rich requires humility and a little bit of healthy fear that everything you've made could disappear. You have to make yourself financially safe so that you never have to sell your stocks during a bad year. The moment you are forced to sell, you break the chain of compounding and the magic stops. That's why survival is the most important word in finance. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's just about your ability to stick around for a long time without quitting or wiping out. So if you want to be smart with your money, stop looking for the next big trend or a shortcut to high returns. Instead, focus on how long you can stay in the game. Pick a simple strategy that is easy enough to stick with, even when the market is crashing. Because at the end of the day, it's not the heavy winter snow that creates an ice age. It's the fact that the snow stays on the ground. If you can just wait and let your money sit for decades, you will eventually hit the part of the curve where the growth explodes and changes your life. Here is the casual, podcast-style rewrite for lessons 2 and 3. I kept the language simple, dropped the heavy textbook words, and focused on making it sound like a natural, easy-to-understand conversation for an intermediate listener. Lesson 2, Tails You Win. If compounding is the engine that drives your wealth, then this next lesson is the fuel that keeps it running. It sounds almost too good to be true. You can be completely wrong half the time, maybe even more, and still make a massive fortune. Most of us go through life terrified of making mistakes. We think that to be successful, we need a perfect record. We assume the richest people in the world are geniuses who never pick a bad stock or start a failing business. But the way the world actually works is much more forgiving, and honestly much more exciting. The truth is, almost everything that is huge, famous, or successful is the result of a tail event. A tail event is just a fancy way of saying a rare, one-in-a-million moment. To see this in real life, look at Heinz Berggruen. He fled Nazi Germany in 1936 and ended up in America. As a young man, he didn't seem like he would achieve much. But by the 1990s, he had become one of the most successful art dealers to ever live. In the year 2000, he sold just a part of his massive art collection to the German government for well over $100 million. In the private market, that collection was actually worth over $1 billion. People looked at him and thought he was a psychic genius. They wondered how one man could have the skill to pick so many winning pieces of art. But his secret wasn't what people thought. He didn't have a crystal ball. Instead, he operated a lot like a modern index fund. He just bought a massive amount of art. He didn't just pick individual pieces he liked. He bought whole collections all at once. Then he sat on them for decades and waited for a few winners to show up. It turns out that 99% of the art he bought might have been worth almost nothing. But that didn't matter. A tiny number of his pieces turned out to be masterpieces by legends like Picasso. Those few massive winners were so valuable that they paid for every single mistake in his collection. He was wrong most of the time, yet he died a billionaire. We see this exact same pattern with Walt Disney. Today, Disney is a global empire, but it almost never happened. Walt's first animation studio actually went bankrupt. His early films were incredibly expensive to make, and many of them lost a ton of money. By the mid-1930s, Walt had produced more than 400 cartoons. Most of them were short, kids loved them, but almost all of them were financial disasters. Then came Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Everything changed in just 83 minutes. Snow White earned $8 million in its first 6 months in 1938, more money than the company had ever seen. It paid off every single debt and turned Walt into a star. In business terms, those 83 minutes were the only thing that actually mattered. That was the tail event that saved the company. This concept is how the entire startup investment world works. If a professional investor puts money into 50 startups, they expect half of them to fail completely and maybe 10 to do okay. They are really just looking for that 1 or 2 home runs that will bring in 100% of the returns. A study of over 21,000 startup investments found that 65% of them lost money, but about 100 companies, just half of 1%, made 50 times their money or more. That tiny group is where all the wealth comes from. In that world, being wrong is totally normal. Success is just about not missing the few big winners that change everything. You might think this only applies to risky startups, but the same rule applies to the entire stock market. Consider the Russell 3000, which is a list of 3,000 large, well-known companies. Since 1980, 40% of all the companies on that list were basically failures. They lost at least 70% of their value and never recovered. And yet, the overall index grew more than 73 times over during that same time. How? Because only 7% of the companies did amazingly well. Superstars like Amazon or Apple did so well that they carried everyone else on their backs, wiping out the losses of thousands of bad companies. This rule even applies to how you behave as an investor. Your success will be decided by how you act during a few moments of pure terror, not by the smooth years when everything is fine. Imagine 3 different investors, Sue, Jim, and Tom. Sue saves money every month and keeps it in the market, no matter what. Jim gets scared during economic crashes and sells everything. Tom gets even more scared and takes 6 extra months to put his money back in after a crash ends. Over 119 years, Sue ended up with over $435,000, while Jim and Tom had way less. Sue's success came down to how she behaved during just 22% of the time, the months when the economy was crashing. Being a financial genius usually just means you can do the normal thing when everyone else around you is going crazy. Even Warren Buffett admitted he has owned 400 to 500 stocks in his life, but made almost all his money on just 10 of them. The lesson for all of us is simple. Stop beating yourself up for making mistakes. The difference between a rich person and a poor person isn't that the rich person never messes up. It's that they stay in the game long enough to find their big winners. If rare events drive your results, then the main goal of your money should be to buy you enough time to find those rare winners. Lesson 3. The highest dividend. The highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, "I can do whatever I want today." Most people want to get rich because they think it will make them happier, but happiness is tricky because everyone wants different things. However, if there's one thing that makes everyone happy, it's having control over their own lives. The ability to do what you want when you want, with whoever you want, for as long as you want, that is completely priceless. This control over your time is the best bonus money can ever pay you. A psychologist named Angus Campbell spent his career studying what actually makes people satisfied with life. He found that you couldn't predict happiness by looking at income, where people lived, or even their education. Instead, the most powerful sign of happiness was simply having a strong feeling of control over one's own life. This sense of freedom matters way more than the exact amount of your salary, the size of your house, or how fancy your job title sounds. The greatest value of money is that it gives you this control over your time. When you save money, you are buying a little bit of independence. A small amount of savings means you can take a few days off work when you're sick without stressing about money. Having a bit more savings means you can wait for a truly good job to come around after being laid off, rather than taking the first bad one you find out of pure desperation. That kind of breathing room changes your whole life. If you have 6 months of living expenses saved up, you don't have to live in fear of a bad boss, because you know you won't be ruined if you need to quit and find a new path. More wealth means you can choose a job that pays less but offers flexible hours or a shorter commute. It means being able to handle a medical emergency without the extra stress of wondering how you'll pay the bills. Ultimately, it means retiring when you actually want to, instead of when you are forced to. Using your money to buy time and options gives you a lifestyle benefit that no luxury item can ever beat. The author of the book learned this lesson the hard way during a summer internship at a big bank. He thought he had won the career lottery because the job paid a ton of money and made him feel important. But he quickly realized the workers, their face schedules more brutal than he knew humans could handle. Going home before midnight was rare. Even though he liked the actual work, having every single second of his life controlled by his boss made it one of the most miserable experiences of his life. He realized that doing something you love on a schedule you can't control feels exactly like doing something you hate. Psychologists call this feeling reactance. People need to feel like they are in the driver's seat of their own lives. The moment someone else forces us to do something, we feel powerless and we want to push back, even if we were originally happy to do it. This is why Derek Sivers, a successful entrepreneur, said that saving $12,000 when he was 22 was the most important financial moment of his life. That money allowed him to quit his job and become a full-time musician. It gave him a level of freedom that even selling his company for millions of dollars later on couldn't beat. Even though people are richer today than ever before, there is no real proof that we are happier than people were in the 1950s. Part of the problem is that we used our extra wealth to buy bigger things, but we gave up control over our time to do it. In 1950, the average American home was under 1,000 square feet. Today it's over 2,400 square feet. Our houses are bigger, but our time feels tighter. A big reason for this is how our jobs have changed. Back in the 1800s, most jobs were manual labor. If you built cars or worked on a farm, your work ended the moment you left the factory or the field. But today, most of us have jobs that require us to use our brains. Because your main tool is your head, your factory is always open. You end up thinking about a work project during your commute, while making dinner, or when you wake up stressed at 3:00 a.m. It feels like you are working 24/7, and that destroys your sense of control. When a researcher interviewed 1,000 elderly people about what made them happy, not a single person said you should work as hard as you can to buy more stuff. They didn't care about being richer than their neighbors. Instead, they valued good friendships, being part of a community, and spending open, relaxed time with their kids. They said your kids don't want your money, they just want you around. Controlling your time is the highest reward money can give you, and it is the only way to make sure your wealth actually turns into real happiness. Here is the casual, podcast-style rewrite for lessons 4 and 5. I kept the sentences punchy, avoided stiff business words, and made the concepts clear and easy to follow for an intermediate listener. Lesson 4. The strategy of high savings. Most people are convinced that the secret to getting rich is either landing a massive salary or being a genius at picking the right stocks. We spend almost all our energy trying to make more money, as if finding more oil to power our lives is the only way to get ahead. But this is a huge mistake because it makes us ignore the only thing we actually control: our savings rate. Building wealth actually has very little to do with your income or your investment returns, and much more to do with how much of that money you choose to keep. To understand why being efficient is way more powerful than finding new money, let's look at the 1970s oil crisis. Back then, it looked like the modern world was about to collapse. The global economy depended on oil, populations were growing, and we just couldn't pump oil out of the ground fast enough to keep up. Experts predicted a dark future where the world would run out of energy. But we didn't run out of oil. We survived the crisis, and it wasn't because we found some hidden underground ocean of petroleum. The main reason we beat the crisis is that we started building cars, factories, and homes that were way more energy efficient than before. In fact, the United States uses about 60% less energy today for every dollar of wealth it creates compared to 1950. We didn't grow our energy wealth by finding more energy. We grew it by cutting down the amount of energy we needed to get things done. This is a huge lesson that applies directly to your bank account. Finding more oil is mostly out of our hands because it depends on nature and global politics. But choosing to be efficient with what we already have is 100% in our control, and it always works. The exact same logic applies to your money. Good investments can definitely make you rich, but the stock market is always full of uncertainty. You never know for sure if the market will cooperate or if your strategy will work in the future. On the other hand, saving money and living simply, which is just financial efficiency, are completely up to you. They work 100% of the time today, and they will work 100% of the time in the future. Wealth, at its core, is just whatever money is left over after you spend. This means you can build wealth without a high income, but you have zero chance of doing it without a high savings rate. To see how this works, imagine two people. Let's say you are a much better investor than I am. You earn 12% a year on your money, while I only earn 8%. On paper, you are winning. But imagine that I am way more efficient with my money. I only need half as much money to be happy as you do. My lifestyle stays simple, while your desires grow just as fast as your bank account. In this scenario, I am actually in a better position. I get more value from my lower returns because the gap between what I have and what I want is much wider. Learning to be happy with less money is exactly the same as getting a huge raise, but it's way easier to do. Professional investors spend millions of hours and billions of dollars trying to get a tiny 0.1% edge in the market. Meanwhile, regular people have tons of extra waste in their personal spending that they could fix with almost zero effort. This brings us to what savings actually is. Past a certain income level, what you need to live comfortably is usually just whatever sits below your ego. Everyone needs the basics like food and shelter, but most spending beyond that is just for show. It's a way to spend money to prove to other people that you have money. If you look at it this way, the best way to save more money isn't to work harder for a raise, it's to practice a little more humility. When you realize that savings is just the gap between your ego and your income, you finally understand why so many people with huge salaries have nothing in the bank. They are stuck in a daily competition to show off and keep up with their neighbors. The people who are truly successful with money are often the ones who simply do not care what others think of them. Another smart trick is to realize that you don't even need a specific reason to save. Most people save for a house, a car, or retirement. That's fine, but you should also save just for the sake of saving. Saving for a specific goal only makes sense if the world is perfectly predictable, but life is full of crazy surprises. Saving money is your best shield against life's ability to drop a disaster on you at the worst possible moment. Every dollar you save is like buying a piece of your future back from someone else. This invisible benefit, gaining control over your time, is worth way more than any item you can buy at a store. Having cash in the bank that gives you the option to change careers, retire early, or just live without anxiety is a return on investment that you can't even put a price tag on. Flexibility is becoming the most valuable currency in the modern world. 100 years ago, competition was local. You only had to be the smartest person in your town to get the best job. But today, we live in a hyper-connected world where you are competing with billions of people globally. Being smart is no longer a guaranteed advantage because there are millions of smart people, and technology is taking over many technical skills. But being flexible is an advantage that nobody can take from you. If you have a high savings rate, you have the safety net to wait for the perfect opportunity. You have the time to learn a new skill when you need to, and the space to find what you love at your own pace. This ability to do what you want when you want is what will truly set you apart. Lesson 5. Define your own game. When the dot-com tech bubble popped in the early 2000s, regular families lost a shocking $6.2 trillion. Not long after, the housing crash wiped away another $8 trillion. These financial disasters ruin lives, yet they keep happening. People usually blame it on greed, but that misses a much deeper lesson. The real reason these crashes happen is that long-term investors start copying other investors who are playing a completely different game. To understand this, we have to look at a dangerous idea in finance: the belief that every stock has one correct price that everyone should agree on. But there is no such thing as a single right price. If you ask how much you should pay for a share of Google stock today, the answer depends entirely on who you are. Are you planning to hold the stock for 30 years? If so, the right price for you depends on how much money the company will make over the next 3 decades. But what if you are a day trader trying to make a quick buck before your lunch break? In that case, the company's long-term future doesn't matter to you at all. You just want to make a small profit from whatever happens to the price in the next 2 hours. When people have different goals, a price that looks completely crazy to one person can make perfect sense to another. This misunderstanding is what creates every financial bubble. Look at the tech bubble of the late 1990s. People today look back at Yahoo stock in 1999 and say the price was insane compared to how much money the company actually made. But the traders buying it back then were only planning to hold it for a few days or even hours. A day trader doesn't care if a stock is overpriced, as long as it moves up for the next hour so they can sell it. The trouble starts when long-term investors start copying those short-term traders. Bubbles happen when the excitement of fast returns attracts a ton of money, and the people driving the prices are suddenly the ones who are only staying for a minute. In 1999, the average investment fund only held onto stocks for about 8 months. They weren't thinking about the next 20 years. They were just chasing whatever was going up right now. Take Cisco stock, which jumped 300% in 1999. At its peak, the company was worth $600 billion. That number was so high that the company would have had to be bigger than the entire U.S. economy to justify it. The day traders didn't care about that math because they were going to sell it before the closing bell anyway. But many long-term investors saw the price rising and thought, maybe these other people know something I don't. They followed the crowd and bought in at the highest price, a fine move for a trader, but a total disaster for someone planning to hold it for years. We saw the exact same thing happen with housing. It makes zero sense to pay $700,000 for a small house if your job can't pay the mortgage. But that price makes perfect sense if you plan to flip the house in a few months for a quick profit. During the housing bubble, the number of people flipping houses multiplied by 5. Those flippers didn't care about long-term interest rates. They only cared that the price would go up next month. The real damage happened when regular families saw the flippers making money and tried to do the same thing, without realizing they were playing by totally different rules. So many of our financial decisions come down to watching what others do and trying to copy them. But if you don't know why someone is spending or investing their money, you won't know when they're going to change their mind and pull out. When you see an expert on TV telling you to buy a certain stock, remember that they don't know you. They don't know if you are a teenager trading for fun or a grandparent living on a fixed budget. The same stock price cannot be right for both of those people. This applies to your everyday spending too. So much of what we buy is driven by society. We see a friend buy a luxury car, and we automatically let their purchase change our expectations for ourselves. But we can only see what they spend. We can't see their goals or their bank accounts. A young lawyer might need a fancy car to look successful for his clients. If a writer who works from home in sweatpants copies that purchase, he is wasting money without getting the same benefit. They are just playing different games. The big takeaway is that almost nothing matters more than understanding your own timeline. You must go out of your way to identify exactly what game you are playing. We call everyone in the stock market investors. But that is just as silly as calling everyone on a sports field athletes, when some are playing tennis and others are just jogging. A great strategy is to actually write down your own personal goal for your money. For example, I am a long-term investor who believes the world economy will grow over the next 30 years. Once you write something like that down, your world changes. You suddenly realize that everything else, like what the stock market did this week or whether a recession is coming next year, is part of a game that you are simply not playing. You can tune out the noise and stop copying people who have totally different goals than you do. When you know your own game, you can just focus on winning your own race. Now that we have covered these 5 major rules, the big picture becomes clear. Financial success isn't about being a genius, finding a secret shortcut, or getting lucky on a hot stock trend. It is entirely about your behavior. If you want to stop chasing money and instead build a life where wealth naturally follows you, the recipe is simple. Give your money enough time so compounding can work its magic. Understand that you don't need to be right every single time. You just need to stay in the game long enough to find your rare, big winners. Focus on increasing your savings rate by keeping your ego in check, rather than obsessing over a bigger salary. Use that saved money to buy back control over your time, which is the ultimate reward of true wealth. And finally, write your own rules and refuse to play someone else's game. At the end of the day, doing well with money is about managing how you act, not how smart you are. If you can stay patient, stay humble, and stick around for the long run, you will inevitably hit that part of the curve where your wealth explodes. Thanks for listening. It's time to stop worrying about what everyone else is doing, play your own game, and just let the money follow you.